When the plot line involves climate change, there's a new narrative, a new story, and telling it has taken on new urgency and agency. I speak with America's most famous weathercaster and a young man finding his digital voice to move the planet forward. Did you know that 2/3 of Americans worry a lot or a fair amount about global warming? That's what a Gallup poll shows. And sure, there's political polarization, lots of it, and the poll shows that too, but 2/3 worried a lot or a little? That's actually a lot of agreement. And that's a story. Hi, I'm Frank Sesno. Welcome to Planet Forward from the George Washington University, produced in association with the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. The famous Al Roker, a host of the Today Show, head of NBC's climate unit, one of America's most celebrated personalities, puts climate change front and center now.
I think the reason why climate is so very important is that it affects everybody now. Short-term forecasting affects folks, but this is a planetary problem of massive urgency that we are out of time as far as taking care of our planet and taking care of this climate issue. And we've lost some time over the last several years as far as we're concerned. This country, other states, cities, municipalities, other countries have been very engaged in this. But it's something that is happening now. And if we don't act now, are we at the tipping point? Nobody knows. But the greatest fear, obviously, is all of a sudden, once we've hit that point, it's the point of no return.
What are some of the most interesting and important climate stories you've done?
In Alaska, we were watching the first climate refugees, native people whose homes and livelihoods have been affected because of climate change. That the warming atmosphere and the warming oceans affecting not only the permafrost where their homes are, but the native species of whales that were being overrun by other species because of the warming oceans.
How do you turn these into stories, Al?
I am, in a sense, just the tip of the spear. We have at NBC News, we have our climate unit, and we have a great group of producers and videographers and researchers who are looking at these stories and saying, okay, if X, then Y. If we see this happening, our job is to be able to tell folks, okay, yes, there's sea level rise, but here's why. If you don't even live next to a coastline, here's why you have to be concerned about it.
Hey, Al, you've said, and these are your words because I read them, climate change affects everybody. It doesn't care if you're black or white, rich or poor, male or female. Climate change affects everybody. How do we bring more of those diverse voices and make that point more clearly in the storytelling and the reporting that we do and the issues around them?
I think while that statement I said is true, what is also true is that people of color, populations of color, are usually more directly affected by climate change, whether it's because of water quality, air quality. These are issues that are, issues of equality. Because if you have greater means, you can sort of ameliorate those effects of climate change, whether it is having problems with food issues or air quality, as I said, or water quality. If you have the means, you can at least cause those problems to be held at bay a little bit more. Whereas if you live in a poorer neighborhood, it's harder to be able to ameliorate those issues. So I do believe that while it affects everybody, it affects some people more than it does others. And that's why we have to make these stories relatable to everybody, because it's not just an issue of climate, it's an issue of human rights as well.
What are the stories and thinking too about the kind of environmental equity issues that you just made reference to, that you most want to tell, or that you most think that people need to understand better?
To me, top of mind is the urgency of this. That, this is one planet. We've only got one. Uh, you know, Going somewhere else at this moment is not an option. And so I think what we are seeing, are these issues, whether it's extreme weather conditions, whether it's a climate that doesn't necessarily cause extreme weather, but allows more extreme weather to happen more, having effects along our coastlines where we're seeing and going to start to see more climate refugees, or towns and states and cities making decisions about sustainability of a lifestyle, for these people who are living along coastlines where roads may have to be raised up, or do we abandon those communities? These are all things that are going to be happening, I mean, for all intents and purposes now. And so I think people can look away, but they do it at their own peril. So I think, to me, I just feel like we have to stress the urgency of this issue, because, I think as we get further out on this timeline, we're going to be seeing harsher and harsher results, and they're going to be happening much more quickly.
You've been weather forecasting for a long time. And one of the things we hear when we talk to people, whether it's farmers who talk about the way the rains come, or people who live in coastal areas or subject to hurricane, that they say what they've seen is that the weather has changed. Have you seen the weather change in your career?
It's the same weather. But it is happening. The extremes are happening more frequently. We're seeing warmer summers. We're seeing colder winters, or in certain places, winters that are not as cold. And so we're seeing a preponderance of greater pollen, of allergy seasons that are getting worse, of pests that would normally die off at certain points. They're not, and now they are becoming more virulent. Seeing species of plants invading areas that they normally would not survive. Yes, where we're seeing rain events, heavier rain events that are 30% more likely to happen, and producing 20% more in the way of precipitation. Longer hurricane seasons, fire seasons that aren't seasons anymore, but are just year round. So we're getting the same weather, but we're getting more extremes of it.
What do you want to do and to give to your audience? Are you trying to inform them, or persuade them, or prompt action, or say, hey, like you said, it's urgent? How do you approach this?
The idea is to give folks the information that they can use to make a decision, to take some sort of action, whether that action is changing perhaps behaviors for themselves, where they live, how they consume natural resources, whether they are going to make demands of their local, state, and federal elected officials, so that they can make a determination what's important to them.
What is your advice to people from whatever walk of life they may come from, who want to be better communicators with respect to climate, who want to, be able to engage the story, if you will? You got some pointers on that?
Look, there are people who are persuadable and people who are not, and I think that you don't necessarily give up on people, but I think there are those who I think fall into three categories. There are those who already feel the way you do. There are those who are on the fence about the way you feel. And there are those that no matter what you do, until something affects them personally, that you're probably not going to change their mind. So I think by being reasonable and not getting personal, and just presenting your story, and sticking with facts without being personally negative, I think ends up winning the day.
You've been all over the world and done all these different stories. If you could take someone who's not quite sure about climate and bring them on an airplane or a boat or something with you and take them and show them something and take them to the story right in the front row, where would you take them? What would you want to show someone?
In this country, I'd take them to Miami so that they can see a sunny day flooding on a regular basis. I would take them to places along the southeastern Atlantic coast where roads flood on a high tide and a stiff wind, where there are no storms coming. I would take them to places where we see wind farms and good, cheap, wind power generating clean energy, and how these are jobs of the future that can sustain us and make us energy independent.
Advice for them?
Keep fighting, that it's your planet, and that, our generation, you and I and folks like us, we're going to be gone soon. So it's your world.
Cal Roker has a big platform. Calvin Bordis can only dream of that kind of reach. He's a second-year student at the State University of New York's College of Environmental Science and Forestry. An environmental science major, Calvin is a 2021 Planet Forward StoryFest winner for his video, Airborne Microplastics in the Age of COVID-19.
So I started researching. After reading many scholarly sources and questioning why nothing much is being done about this issue, this is some of what I learned.
Calvin, you put yourself in this story, and in a very fun, quirky way. Why?
Well, I felt that putting myself in this story would make the viewers feel as if I'm reaching out to them individually. That way, it encourages them to develop a personal connection to the story. And I feel that this connection was also encouraged by my relatable humor, which is especially popular in the digital space. Main culprit between microplastics and climate change is our reliance on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are used in plastic production, but unfortunately, the use of them causes the Earth to warm, which leads to climate change. In fact, I found this statistic. Carbon dioxide emissions from plastic production are expected to approach 1.34 billion tons per year by the year 2030. There were quite a few things I made sure to include to maximize social media. Video's portrait orientation tailored to smartphones, opportunities to screenshot, which allow the story's message to be heard well after the video has been watched. The hook at the beginning, since you only have a few moments before viewers make their decision to continue watching or swipe past on social media. And also comedic aspects to maintain the viewer's attention throughout the video.
Calvin, what do you want people to take away from your video?
I want my viewers to take away two main points. That microplastics are a problem, which is relevant to everyone, and that we can take action against this growing problem, since we already have produced 6.3 billion metric tons of plastic waste globally.
Calvin, thanks so much for doing your video, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Good stories need character, plot, and place, and a hero's journey, or what I like to think of as compelling characters overcoming obstacles to achieve a worthy outcome. Compelling character, planet Earth and all its creatures. Obstacles, we know what they are, and we actually believe they exist. Worthy outcome, a livable, sustainable planet. Now that would be a story. For Planet Forward at the George Washington University and Arizona State University's Global Futures Lab, I'm Frank Sesno. In the face of accelerating climate change, slowing carbon emissions won't be enough. Can we do something much bigger, reversing the damage, taking greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere to move the planet forward? Think about this, a mechanical tree that can absorb 1,000 times the carbon dioxide of a natural tree. Now imagine forests of these things, silently sucking up billions of tons of carbon dioxide, reversing the driving force of human-induced climate change, helping the Earth move toward a carbon balance. Hi, I'm Frank Sesno. Welcome to Planet Forward from the George Washington University, produced in association with the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. Klaus Lochner is an engineering professor at ASU, director of the Center for Negative Carbon Emissions, and a member of the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation. He's been working on direct air capture of carbon dioxide for more than 2 decades, and now has mechanical trees to show for it. Describe your mechanical tree, what it looks like.
In effect, what it has in common with a normal tree, it has leaves. These are surfaces which in both cases can bind CO2, in the case of the mechanical tree, because these are sorbent, which just bind CO2. And so you have leaves where the air blows over. In our particular case, think of this as a column, about 5 feet in diameter, 30 feet tall. And there are 150 discs which make up this column. They are stacked above each other, about a few inches apart. And the wind blows between the gaps between these. These are the leaves on the tree. And after a time, maybe 20 minutes to an hour, they are loaded with CO2. And then the entire stack of discs drops down into a drum. The lid closes. We can now pull the air out and heat it and make it wet in there. And as a result of that heat, the CO2 comes loose and fills the drum up, and we'll pull it out, compress it, and process it on so that we can now deliver the CO2.
How does that actually work? The leaves being exposed to the CO2 and pulling the CO2 or absorbing the CO2?
This is a passive process, so it's like a windmill sees the wind coming and it extracts the kinetic energy. We see the air blowing over these discs, and the discs have a material on it, a sorbent, typically a resin of some sort that binds CO2 quite strongly. So it is good enough that when the air comes out on the backside of this disc, it has less CO2 than before, and that CO2 is stuck to these surfaces, to these leaks.
Then what happens to the carbon dioxide? What gets done with that so it's really out of the atmosphere?
So unlike a real tree, a natural tree, we are not doing photosynthesis. We are not creating biomass. We simply free the CO2. And now we have pure CO2 we can compress all the way up to a liquid. Now, you can dispose of that by injecting it deep underground. You can make mineral carbonates out of it, because that's another way of disposal. Or you could make fuels out of it. You can close the carbon cycle. You have now a source of CO2, which is different than fossil fuels. And either you think of this as a waste management problem where you dispose of the CO2, or you think of it as a carbon cycle which you are closing, where you take the CO2 and convert it back into a fuel you can burn over and over again.
We're talking about massive amounts, right? That ideally, that you'd be pulling out of the atmosphere. How do we dispose of so much of that?
Well, the one technology which most people would agree is ready to go comes ultimately from geological storage. These are, people have drilled holes into the ground to pull oil and gas out. So people say we can use the very same holes to inject CO2. And alternatively, we can go to other places where there was no oil and gas, where there was just saline water deep underground, and we pump CO2 into these formations, and it will stay there for thousands and thousands of years.
We're now emitting, just to be clear, how much carbon dioxide each year, and as a planet, and how would your mechanical tree, if deployed, as I said earlier, we had forests of these things around the world, address that?
So there would be big forests, but they wouldn't beyond what's humanly capable. If you think of these individual trees I just said, we probably would need 1 billion of these single columns.
1 billion.
We have 1 billion cars on the road. So we actually do know that we can produce things of that size and quality quite easily at that scale. But it is a formidable task. Currently, we are emitting 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year. That's 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year. And some people have said, well, we need to get a lot better. And I agree with that, and we should do less. But then I was part of a paper some few years ago where we argued the last 20% are really hard. Think of airplanes and ships and steel mills and cement plants and all of that. And if you look at annual growth in energy consumption, it's roughly 2% a year. Well, if you do this until 2100, another 80 years, you will be 5 times larger. We started at 280 parts per million. 350.org, an organization which is very much into fighting climate change, gave its very name to say 350 is where we should stop. Well, now we are at nearly 420, and we are going up 2.5 ppm a year. So we will hit 450 and probably even 500 if we are not careful. But if we want to come back 100 parts per million, we need to, for about 40 years, collect 40 gigatons a year to make that happen. So yes, the challenge is formidable. The only way to make this work is to think this was dumping waste into the atmosphere. We need to stop dumping. We need to clean up what we do as we go. But we also will have to clean up what we did in the past.
We're having this conversation as we are seeing record heat in parts of the country, parts of the United States anyway, that have not seen heat like this, the Northwest, the West. We hear of these heat domes. Have we reached a tipping point?
I think we have reached a number of tipping points. I think we now have reached the decade where people will demand that something is be done about it. And I think that leads to a separate tipping point. Until now, this was a problem environmentalists cared about, sort of the green end of the politics spectrum cared about. I think what you are now seeing is a transition away from that, in that everybody cares about it. So this is turning from a green environmental policy question into a pragmatic problem. How do we actually keep energy in the system and make things clean? It is not just people who have an environmental motivation to make it happen, but everybody. Maybe even the most important tipping point is that until recently, you could have said, if we put on the brakes as fast as we can stop at a level of CO2 in the atmosphere which is tolerable. I think we are too late for that. The fact that we cannot fix everything anymore doesn't mean we should throw up our hands and give up. Quite the contrary, because things get progressively worse. And this is one of the features of the climate change and CO2. But the bottom line is we need to pull back. And 350.org may very well be right. And we need to figure out how to get there. Now you need negative emissions. I think the debate, whether we should or shouldn't do that, because it may or may not motivate people to do the right thing, is by now too late. In 1980, we could have had this debate. But then everybody ignored it, and we kept going. And now we are past that point, and we need to do something. And I think this is changing the debate, because there was a debate about behavior, about being an environmentalist. At this point, it hurts people who don't think about it themselves as environmentalists, and they also will demand that the problem gets solved.
Well, you are in the forefront of this, and the work you're doing is remarkable, and I hope that your technology catches on, that your interdisciplinary approach to it can really accelerate all of this, because we need it. Klaus Lackner, thank you so much for your time and your insight, and of course, all your work. Carbon dioxide is the most prevalent greenhouse gas. Methane is the second, representing about 20% of global emissions. It's also more than 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide in trapping heat. Methane's relatively short-lived, though, so cutting methane emissions now would have a relatively quick impact on addressing global warming. Clarice Connelly is an English writing arts major at the State University of New York at Plattsburgh. She wrote a story for Planet Forward about a dramatic, even artistic effort to capture methane emissions in Montreal, Canada. Tell me about Park Frederick Bach.
Park Frederick Bach is a 350-acre park. It lies about 10 kilometers from downtown Montreal, and it's in the middle of the St. Michael Environmental Complex. It's a manicured greenscape now, but you don't see the real story behind it because so much of it is actually underground. It was a quarry that turned into the city's landfill for about 10 years. This was one of the city's main landfills, and now it's a park, all 350 acres of it. There are hundreds of fiberglass spheres that dot this landscape. Each stand about 6 feet tall, and at night they actually glow in the dark. It makes for a very unique stroll in the park, but these giant spheres are not just for aesthetic purposes. They actually capture methane that's rising up from the ground. The decision to collect methane is extremely impressive and sustainable. And the methane is put to good use. It's the nearby Gazmont Power Station converts it into electricity, and then that is sold to Hydro-Quebec. It could have been an industrial area, but instead people are invited to walk through and interact with the orbs. They collect light from the sun. As I said before, they glow in the dark. But also when a park goer waves a flashlight and runs it across the orb surface, bright light follows the pattern drawn on by the person. So it's fun.
How common is this kind of reuse of landfills, Clarice, especially the methane capture part of it?
Montreal is not the only city thinking of ways to reuse these old landfills. In the United States, at least, there are 550 of these types of landfill energy projects taking place. This is according to the EPA, and 480 candidate landfills as of March of this year. But these projects are really important because landfill gas comprises a huge part of all methane emissions. In the US, 17.7% of all methane emissions come from landfill gas. It really is the perfect candidate to be captured, prevented from just going into the atmosphere and turned into electricity.
I love the way we can bring ingenuity, intellect, and imagination together to solve problems. Like a mechanical tree with discs that can pull carbon dioxide out of the air, or orbs that are visually attractive over a landfill to capture methane. This is what we need to do, not just to clean up our mess, but to move the planet forward. For Planet Forward at the George Washington University and ASU's Global Futures Lab, I'm Frank Sesno.